Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for making it to this side event so late in the day. I know it has been a long day. Hopefully it was loaded with interesting presentations and interesting negotiations, inspired discussions. My name is Gernot Laganda. I have the privilege to guide you through this side event. I work with the World Food Programme, coordinating the climate and disaster risk reduction programs there. The evening today is about land use and climate finance. It's an especially critical topic because it has a twin bearing on both greenhouse gas emissions as well as climate change adaptation. And our baseline on land use is actually pretty grim. Agriculture, forestry, and land use generate around a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions, and at the same time, land is essential to meet growing demands for food, fuel, and fiber, supporting over 2.6 billion people who are engaged in agriculture worldwide. And here we get into a discussion about poverty, inequality, and vulnerability. The poorest and most food insecure people on the planet live on the most degraded lands, and in addition, many do not own the land that they work on. Yet they are intimately connected with this resource, depending on land for the production of foodstuffs and protection against climate-related shocks and stresses. So in essence, we have a twin problem at hand. We are managing our land resources in a way that increases climate-related problems, and yet at the same time reduces capabilities of the poorest members of society to use land as a productive and protective resource. The discussion today is meant to share some perspectives on this issue and explore the role climate finance can play in making a more integrated approach to land use happen. We have asked our panelists to focus on some of the main challenges. First, the unmet demand for climate finance that focuses on land use. Second, the challenges to attract more investment into land use. Third, the role of institutional and political commitment at country level. And lastly, examples of bankable and innovative programs on climate-smart land use. The event will be split in two parts. In the first part, we will invite senior representatives from governments as well as a representative voice from the multilateral system to share their perspective on the issue. And there I have to inform you that we are still waiting for one member of the panel, the Minister of Environment in Mali, which we understand is still held up in another meeting, but we hope that she will be able to join us very shortly. So we will start with His Excellency Mr. Luis Felipe Arauz, Minister of Agriculture and Livestock of Costa Rica. Dr. Arauz is an agronomist and biologist. He has served as research professor and dean of the Faculty of Agri-Food Sciences at the University of Costa Rica. He was also a director of the College of Agronomists of Costa Rica and the Institute of Innovation and Transfer of Agricultural Technology of the Ministry of Agriculture. On several occasions, Dr. Arauz has coordinated international cooperation actions in the agricultural area. Then we have Mrs. Margarita Astralaga, who is the Director of the Environment and Climate Division at the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD. Margarita is a Colombian biologist, specialist in environmental management, with over 25 years of experience in the environment and sustainable development sector. Among organizations she collaborated with are the Colombian Environmental Agency, the United Nations Environment Programme, the Secretariat of the Convention of Trade and Endangered Species, of the Inter-American Development Bank, and IUCN. So I'm going to ask Minister Arauz to start his remarks. Then I'm going to ask Dr. Astralaga to provide her remarks, and after that we will have a first round of question and answers, after which we will then give other speakers the opportunity to join us on this panel. Dr. Arauz, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to thank the organizers for allowing me to be here and share some of our perspectives in climate financing. Second, I would like to acknowledge and give thanks to Marianela Feoli, the director of Funde Cooperación, who's an agency that has channeled and managed many international funds for climate in Costa Rica, and she provided most of the information I'm going to present. I would like to start with the challenges. But first of all, I would like to make a point, because climate change, although is in many countries is leader the climate change policies by the ministries of the environment, it's not just an environmental issue. It's a development issue. And as such, it touches many, many things. It touches even many of the sustainable development goals. Sometimes, especially in agriculture, we think that we're related only to the sustainable development goal that has to do with the elimination of hunger. But that is not the case. We have the effect of agriculture in climate, and the effects of climate in agriculture have to do with hunger, have to do with poverty, but also the agriculture, it's an activity that helps climate action, reduction of emissions, but also can help the energy sector, which is another of the sustainable development goals, have sustainable energy for all. And agriculture has a lot of saying there. So there is a relationship between sustainable development goals and the national determined contribution of the NDCs, because by mitigating greenhouse gases, agriculture can contribute to productivity, but also can contribute to sustainable energy and to reduce hunger and poverty. What are the main challenges? We think that first challenge is that we need better coordination of the ministers of agriculture with the ministers of environment. In every single international climate fund, the focal point is the Minister of Environment. And if we don't have close coordination with them, it is very unlikely or very likely that we're not getting enough funding for agriculture-related projects. Sometimes we have people in the Ministries of the Environment that said, no, that project is very production-oriented, and sometimes we need to correct that. The other challenge is that we need to convince all stakeholders within the countries to finance mitigation practices. Sometimes it's very clear-cut that they'll finance adaptation practices, but mitigation, sometimes they don't see the return for the money. But we have proven through several experiences, at least in Costa Rica, that mitigation can lead to more efficient use of resources and more productivity. How to unlock larger sums for climate finance? To get climate finance to meet the local implementing agencies that are willing to use this as seed money, or for development banks, we need for mitigation strategies not to be a burden on the average citizen. In agriculture, that means that climate-smart agriculture has to provide an advantage to the growers so that agriculture systems are better than business as usual. And we think that is not only possible, I think it's feasible, and also is the ethical way to go. Success stories need to be systematized, need to be communicated, and need to be replicated. And for that, we need finance, and we need to do this in order to get the finance. I'm going to talk very briefly about the Costa Rican case. The main international agencies that have funneled money to Costa Rica are the multilateral investment funds of the International Development Fund, which has funneled about $2 million and leveraged about $1.5 million. The Adaptation Fund, which has provided $2.5 million and has more on the way for new projects. India Agriculture in Coastal Zones and Water Resources. The German Cooperation Agency, GIZ, has channeled 7 million euros for the second phase of the coffee NAMA for the implementation. So we need this information in order to be able to prepare and to come up with bankable projects for local financial institutions to be able to finance projects in agriculture that are climate smart. We have, from these actions, we have results in which both coffee and livestock increase productivity, reducing emissions, and adapting to climate change. I'm not going to give details here because I don't have time, but we think that with these results we can convince local banks to finance climate smart agriculture projects. For example, the National Development Banking System, we have been able to put together a program to finance fundamental changes in the livestock sector that leads to better, more efficient climate agriculture. All this brings to the final challenge that we need to address is how to convince people to do this. And this requires a fundamental change in the way we practice agriculture. And this is being done. We have seen very interesting results, but we need multi-stakeholder synergies. We need information dissemination, technology transfer, and international cooperation as pre-requirements. Thank you very much.
Margarita, can I ask you to deliver your remarks, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Gernot. And I'm very pleased to be here to deliver this message on behalf of the Rome-based agencies. Some people may not know who are the lucky ones of the UN system that live in Rome, but it's the World Food Programme, FAO, and IFAD, as well as the UNFCCC Secretariat. I'm very, very pleased to welcome all of you to this side event on delivering the Paris Agreement through improved access to climate finance for land use. I'm very honored to, for the second time in this afternoon, be sitting beside the Minister Luis Felipe Arauz from Costa Rica. And it seems this is a pattern, a trend, because we did the same in Marrakesh, so we continue doing this, sitting together, sharing panels. Also, I'm pleased to be here with the panelists that will follow us after we have this first part of the event, and having the Africa Risk Capacity, having the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund, and the World Farmers Organization also in the second part of the panel. So on behalf of the Rome-based agencies and UNFCCC, we would also like to use this opportunity to thank Germany, one of the largest contributors to the UN system, for hosting us here in Bonn. We would also like to thank the Honorable Minister who have taken time to be on this panel, and hopefully the Mali Minister will also be able to join us when she finds her way here. And we greatly appreciate, of course, the participation of all of you at this late hour. We greatly value the strong partnerships with all your countries and institutions, because we all speak here with one voice. We are all concerned about the most vulnerable people in the rural areas of the developing world. So we are here to talk about climate change, land use, and food security and nutrition. As the Minister said, we are not only concerned with SDG 1 and SDG 2. We are worried about women. We are worried about consumption patterns. We are worried, of course, about climate and food security also about land degradation and biodiversity. So that's, I think, why we all of us are here. And it's clear that the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals provide us for a coordinated multilateral response to unsustainable land use and deforestation. Under the UNFCCC process, nations are taking practical steps to implement their national determined contributions. And we, as UN agencies and multilaterals, are also making an effort to support all of you in this serious endeavor. As part of the United Nations systems, we also commit to support our member states to integrate climate change planning into country strategies and programs. And we know, as the minister was stating, on the challenges, the big challenge we have in agriculture and the linking with climate change. And that is why it's so important to make sure that we integrate climate change in planning in all the sectors into those country strategies and programs. But of course, we know that planning is not enough. Plans and programs must be urgently implemented and not left in those drawers or those bookshelves, which means more climate finance, both public and private, is required. IFAD, WFP, FAO, and UNFCCC have been working with different sources of climate finance to promote climate resilience in the land use sectors. We currently work in the partnership of the Global Environment Facility, the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, and a number of multilateral and bilateral partners to leverage maximum impacts from our investments. And our agencies use climate finance to build capacity amongst smallholder farmers and their organizations through farmer field schools and extension services. We promote sustainable land and water management, cost-effective adaptation measures, whilst facilitating the active participation of women in every step of the way. Thus far, our experiences programming climate finance have led to very positive achievements that I would like to share with you. FAO is partnering with UNDP to support 12 nations to more effectively support the agriculture sector through their national adaptation plans. FAO has also worked closely with UNDP and UNEP to support countries to enhance REDD+ readiness under the UN REDD program. And they have also produced important tools to help nations monitor and assess their actions to mitigate carbon emissions and build the resilience of farmers and pastoralists. Investments in innovative solutions towards food security, resilience building, and risk financing are essential to transform the way we address the impacts of climate disasters. And for example, WFP has developed programs to make national safety nets shock responsive, including through introducing microinsurance for smallholder farmers in the framework of the R4 Rural Resilience Initiative. IFAD's climate portfolio provides about 500 million of financing. An important part of these funds goes to our work to catalyze the implementation of the climate policies, green technologies, practices, and investing in small and medium-sized enterprises. IFAD's flagship program for mobilizing climate finance is the adaptation of a smallholder program, or ASAP, which since 2012 provided about $300 million to help smallholders build their resilience to climate-related shocks and stresses. That's why, of course, I'm a fan of ASAP, and I hope a lot of you are also fans of ASAP. Part of the challenge of the UN system is ensuring that developing nations can access the climate finance they require to invest in the transformation of the agricultural and land use sectors. And in an earlier event, we were talking about the problem we are facing, that some of the financiers are saying we don't have bankable proposals. And then on our side, we are saying there is not enough money. So we have to be able to join these dots and get together in that middle point where the financiers and the interested parties can really find this finance that is available. The global mechanism of the UNCCD is engaged in supporting nations to effectively tap financing opportunities for projects and programs anchored to the targets of the SDGs. And it has been spearheading the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund, an innovative impact investment fund launched at UNCCD COP13 in September 2017, just a month and a half ago in China. So maybe that's part of the response, and we will hear more about it in the next panel. Further to the global mechanism is now developing jointly with UNFCCC and CBD, the Rio Convention's project preparation facility, which will enable the design of large-scale land use projects delivering climate, biodiversity, and land benefits in the best sense of the Rio Convention's synergy. So based on our experiences, we have learned lessons in terms of how we can better program climate finance. And according to a study conducted by WFP, OCHA, UNHCR, and UNICEF, investing in disaster reduction, climate adaptation, and resilience building represents a net savings of about $1.8 US for each dollar spent in emergency response. So ideally, we should be investing in before the emergency happens, because we can make a lot of savings and prevent the deaths of many people around the world. More investment in preparedness, therefore, can lead to a more accurate picture of climate change impacts on food security and nutrition, help identifying the priorities and the gaps, and enable the deployment of innovative techniques and technologies. And as we discussed in our earlier event, the private sector plays a key role, and we are trying, all of us, to see how we can ensure that we would work closely with the private sector, the finance sectors, and as we also discussed earlier, the insurance, the investors, the bonds, the equity markets, because all of them can play a key role in this development of more sustainable agriculture. Rome-based agencies are also working together to programs and projects that develop policy instruments to effectively manage climate-induced risks. One example of this Rome-based collaboration is through the Green Climate Fund project in Senegal, where the three Rome-based agencies are discussing with the idea of strengthening smallholder farmers' resilience to eliminate shocks through the development of an agricultural insurance market. With integrated land use at the heart of the Rome-based agencies and the UNCCD approach to sustainable development, we must work harder to support nations' efforts to mainstream climate-informed land use international plans on agriculture, adaptation, and investment, as well as their monitoring and evaluation frameworks. Our world today has the political commitment, the financial resources, the technology, and the know-how to tackle the development challenges before us. But we must act now to apply them to the implementation of the Paris Agreement and the post-2030 agenda. I thank you now for your attention, and I look forward to our discussion and the questions and answers section. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margarita. Thank you, Minister Arauz. I would like to open the floor for a number of questions that you have. You have had the opportunity to get the government perspective on the issue. You heard about some of the instruments that the multilateral system is deploying in order to make climate finance work for sustainable land use. So I'm inviting you to frame a few questions that might always have been burning when you, or you know, that fit with the reason why you joined this event that late in the day, because I assume all of you are really interested in the issue. Otherwise, you would be in the next meeting room where much more action is going on, right? Where we have the US political realities play out. But I'd really like to invite you to open up with your questions, be they, be they technical, be they political, anything you would like to ask a senior representative of a government and a senior representative from a multilateral institution about land use, sustainable land use, and climate finance. The floor is open. Okay, so I have 1, 2, and 3. Would you like to make the start? Sorry, there's a microphone right here. Yes.
Thank you. Again, good afternoon, and thank you for having the pleasure to listen to you twice in the day. It's a privilege. I have a question that is related to today, and I'm taking advantage that we are a very privileged group of being able to ask. Germany has the power, the economic power, thanks to the investment that they had done in the small and medium entities. It is the key of the development, if you see, of within the European countries of Germany. And this is because they have invested and they have done city capital to the small and medium ones. This kind of finance for growth, I have not seen it replied in the climate finance. In mitigation, you can see that you have the big funds, the international development banks, but you don't have a system that is funding the small and the medium ones, that they can trigger at their level their actions. And if we didn't see it in the mitigation, I don't know if we can think that we can see it in the resilience and an adaptation. I would like to see with your experience, how do you think that is possible? Because that is the only way that we can cover not only the top level, but also the low one, and by themselves with their own resources. Thank you.
And could you kindly tell us which institution you're representing? Laganda.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can I invite a second question? Thank you.
Yeah, so my name is Nelson Lee. I'm from Vancouver, Canada. And my question is more from a kind of personal, churches often donate, they want to help. So they donate funds or they send people out to help and whatnot. And I just wonder from your perspective, what can we really do to be helpful as Canadian donors, and not, mainly small scale, but you're donating to different projects. Yeah, what can we be doing to be helpful to really address, be more resilient in the food system and be helpful to people? Thank you.
Thank you. And there was another question in the back. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Hansel. I come from UNFCCC, and my question is specifically for His Excellency Minister. So you've mentioned that because of institutional government arrangement, focal points-wise, some climate finance tends to be allocated to a particular agency. And so for other UN agencies, what kind of support could we provide for you to have kind of resources that needed for you to implement the projects that you mentioned? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask you to respond in the order of speakers? So, Minister, you first, if you may. Thank you.
Yes, those three are very, very interesting questions. What Hansel just mentioned, I was referring especially to those climate funds like GEF or the Green Climate Fund or Adaptation Fund and others that are channeled specifically for the issue of climate change. All of them need the approval of the Minister of the Environment. And that is not necessarily a problem, but it poses a challenge that we need closer coordination. And I understand that is not usually the case, or in many countries that is not the case. The Ministry of Agriculture goes this way, the Ministry of the Environment goes this way, and even there's a lot of conflictivity between the agricultural sector and the environment sector, which has caused, in my opinion, a mistrust between, especially at the middle people level, between agriculture and environmental sector. And that you see it in the private arena and also in the public arena. We need to eliminate that mistrust. We need to go from the conflictivity to the synergy between the environment and the agricultural ministers and NGOs and production systems. So, and I think we need to do more in that area. We need to be proactive in that. About small financing for small growers in our farmers in Costa Rica. I'm talking about, since we're talking about food systems, food production, I'm going to talk about growers. But I mentioned earlier the system for development, the banking system for development. That is not a bank. It's more like a system that channels money by different mechanisms. It channels money to this fund or these endowments that are used to lend money to smallholders with very low interest and very easy conditions to provide this development. But it is a fairly recent. The law was changed in 2014, and it started operating in 2015 actually. And in that short period of time, the allotment of money has increased by about 400% in the past 3 years. And most of that, or all of that, is dedicated to small growers or to small companies. And now, this year, we approved financing mechanism for climate-smart livestock, in which we are going to have small interest and easy loans for people that want to go to transformational activities within what has been developed since 2013 on the livestock NAMA, now called the Low Carbon Livestock Production Program. And those strategies that are proven to work are the ones that we want this program to finance. How can Canada donate? Well, I think we need to talk to the Canadian Agency for International Development and see who is eligible and who's not. I mean, we had this problem with the USAID that middle-income countries are not eligible anymore. When they told us that we were not eligible because we were not third world anymore, then that was a very expensive compliment, I would guess, because we lost the possibility of that. But there are other funding agencies that we need to look at from the agricultural climate smart perspective.
Thank you for those very interesting questions and so different. I think I would like to start first with the questions from UNCCD and what role can the UN system play? Because I think part of the problem we have is that we work in silos, and the governments work in silos, with all due respect, Minister, because of the sectors. And we have our focal points, each of us. So you are my focal point, Minister of Agriculture. Some other has Minister of Environment, the others have Minister of Finance. And the governments themselves are not getting organized in a way that they can share information and they can get together in a coordination meeting. So part of what, at least from IFAD, we are trying to do is making sure that when we do the country strategies, we get all ministries involved in this. Because when we are developing, for example, rural energy, it's microgrids, it's very, very tiny. But we need ministries of energy somehow linked. It's not just ministries of agriculture. So it's just, I think from both sides, from the government effort of coordinating, but also when we are discussing with the government, making sure that other ministries are present. I think that is extremely important because slowly, I think we all see that we all win if we have all the sectors involved in our discussions. Then on the funding of the SMEs, I think you raise a very, very important point there. I honestly don't think that we have such a mechanism in place for the world. When we talk about the Montreal Protocol on ozone, we say it's the most successful environmental multilateral agreement there ever was. Why? Because the fund was established to support the small and medium enterprises, to change the way they were doing business, their approaches, to not produce more ozone destructive gases. They were given loans. It was not grants. It was concessional loans that the small and medium enterprises paid back. But immediately, when these small enterprises started changing their equipment, they discovered also that they were becoming more efficient and more competitive. So maybe that is a brilliant idea, because we, as IFAD, of course, we promote some of the small enterprises that are linked to our value chains, the value chains that we are supporting. But there are a lot more, obviously, that are not in our value chains, that we are not, maybe are not getting help from anyone. So probably having this open discussion of innovative ideas on how these kind of facilities could be established to really support the small and medium enterprises, I think it's a very good idea. Maybe a regional facility for different regions, or maybe a global facility, which probably would be more difficult. But maybe, as we were saying, that Germany is one of our most generous donors for the UN system on climate. Maybe that's an idea we should propose now to our host. On Canadian donors, I think that everywhere you go, and at this meeting, a lot of smallholders, for example, have approached us on how do we get some money to do this or that in my country, in Zimbabwe, in Uganda, in Rwanda. And the need is huge, but the issue is how do you organize it? And one of the ideas that might work, depending on the amounts of money we are talking about, is a small grants fund where a lot of small donors could contribute, and then there is a competitive approach deciding on priority countries. Again, as the minister said, we have the problem of the UMICs, the upper middle income countries, versus the LDCs, the least developed countries. And we were talking before coming in that many of these middle income countries have huge problems regarding the amount of poor in the rural areas, and that they need a lot of attention, but because the GDP, they are now upper middle income countries. Okay, it's an issue of distribution, but that doesn't stop the fact that there are a lot of poor rural people that need support. So I would also say that if you have clear ideas of your priority countries, there are also very good NGOs, for example, working in the country that could be a good partner to have additional funding to do the work. In our case, our challenge always in this sector is how to get to the smallholders. And that is a real challenge, because we have to get to the very remote areas through the national systems. But when you are coming from not a multilateral, but maybe bilateral or private sector support, then it's easier to go to local areas where there is a huge need for additional funding to carry out their activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're at about halftime of the event, and I understand that some of you, Margarita, you have to also go to another one. So we are proposing to switch the panel. We have also been joined by Her Excellency Minister Aida Keita from Mali. Welcome. And I'm inviting the Minister of Mali to the panel, then Ms. Ekhosuehi Iyahen, Director of Policy and the Technical Advisory Services Department of the Africa Risk Capacity, Mr. Boris Spassky, Investment Director of the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund, and Noel Oettle from the World Farmers Representative. And I ask you to join me in a clap of hands for the Minister of Costa Rica and Margarita Astralaga. Thank you. Okay, sorry for the shuffling around. So we had to improvise a little bit. The Honorable Minister was basically delayed on her way back from the Bula zone, so we will slot her into the second panel, right? And we will have the privilege of hearing now from Minister Aida Keita, formerly UNDP Environmental Program Manager and Advisor. Madam Minister has worked within the organization to advance Mali's environmental issues for a very long time. She is also involved in the civil society and is an active member of associations working to strengthen participation and representation of women's organizations in the development process. So I would like to ask Madam Minister to deliver her keynote remarks. I understand that we also have a bit of translation services going on, courtesy of our colleagues from IFAD. Thank you. Madam Minister, the floor is yours.
Bonsoir. Merci beaucoup pour cette invitation. Je pense que le sujet pour nous tous qui sommes ici est très important. Pour un pays comme le Mali, le programme d'agriculture est fondamental. L'agriculture est le pôle de développement le plus important pour notre pays. Et donc, le lien avec les changements climatiques est vite fait. Par rapport aux changements climatiques, les politiques agricoles actuelles, la campagne agricole est préparée sur la base de l'intégration des changements climatiques. Nous avons également un aspect important qu'il faut souligner, c'est la contribution déterminée nationale qui a été élaborée et qui est en train d'être mise en œuvre. Nous avons le plan d'investissement et une feuille de route par rapport à ça. Et donc, l'agriculture, malgré que le Mali soit un puits actuellement, nous avons quand même un programme de réduction dans le secteur de l'énergie qui est de 31%, dans le secteur de l'agriculture, 29%, et bien sûr les forêts, un engagement de 21%. Par rapport à toutes ces activités, il y a des mécanismes de financement qui permettent à l'agriculture d'être durable ou d'être rentable et d'appuyer surtout la lutte contre la pauvreté, mais également la mise en œuvre des différentes conventions internationales, notamment biodiversité, changement climatique, désertification. Donc, pour la mise en œuvre des CDN, qui est quand même un axe important, le mécanisme est fondé essentiellement sur la mobilisation des ressources nationales, mais également la mobilisation de ressources au niveau international. Et donc, les différents guichets qui s'offrent à nous, c'est bien sûr les mécanismes du Fonds pour l'environnement mondial. Ça a été dit tout à l'heure également, le Small Grant, mais également tous les mécanismes comme le Fonds des pays les moins avancés. Et vous savez qu'il y a actuellement des initiatives, notamment l'initiative 3S et également l'initiative 3A. Donc le Mali est concerné par toutes ces initiatives. Et la mobilisation des ressources, elle se fait bien sûr sur la base de ces programmes dont j'ai parlé et des projets qui sont des projets intégrés de lutte contre les changements climatiques comme porte d'entrée, mais qui sont exécutés et mis en œuvre par le département de l'agriculture, mais également par le département de l'élevage, etc. Donc le ministère en charge de l'environnement assure de façon spécifique la coordination et la mise en œuvre de ces différents programmes.
Thank you.
So maybe just a brief summary of what Her Excellency said regarding Malian efforts to mobilize climate finance and also domestic or foreign investment to implement their NDCs. So the links between environment and climate is quite strong in Mali, and they are doing a lot of work to bring all these sector ministries to work together. The Ministry of Environment is the lead in terms of coordinating, and they are working also with the Ministry of Livestock, the other sector ministries like agriculture, and different sources of funding, of course, identified. They are working to mobilize those resources in addition to the national and domestic resources. So some of these global mechanisms are the GEF, the GCF, or the Adaptation Fund, and they have their NDCs here. In terms of NDCs, they have 31% target for the energy sector, 29 for agriculture, and 21 for the forest. So part of their work is more to align their national effort to reach these different targets. So she's in charge of coordinating this effort, but also the national coordination to mobilize domestic and foreign resources and implement those NDCs. So this is in just to get it very briefly and just to show also what Mali in terms of Mali is doing in terms of climate resilience and at the same time mitigation, especially in the context of the Sahel.
Merci beaucoup, Madame le Ministre, et partez pour la traduction. I will move down the panel now, inviting Mr. Boris Spassky, Investment Director of the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund. Boris Spassky is the fund director based in Paris. He has 10 years of experience in agribusiness, value chain finance, and public-private partnerships, with a career spanning 3 continents, working for one of the world's leading commodity merchants. Boris holds an MBA from INSEAD. And you know, for this second panel, we have basically given the speakers a guiding question, because we felt that after the higher level political perspective, it is important to drill down a bit into the questions of climate finance. So the question for the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund was, how can international climate finance, such as the LDN Fund, be used to catalyze much larger sums of public and private investment that's needed to deliver the Paris Agreement, and especially SDG 15.3, which is by 2030, combat desertification, restore degraded land and soil, including land affected by desertification, drought and floods, and strive to achieve a land degradation neutral world, which is the basic mission of the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund. So Boris, this floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So the LDN Fund was initiated by the United Nations Convention to combat desertification. In 2015, they came up with a tender in the market. Moreover, French bank won the tender and a mandate to structure and launch a fund that would combat land degradation. So the LDN Fund, 2 years later, the LDN Fund is set to reach a first close of $100 million, we hope, at the Climate Finance Day in Paris on December the 12th. And we believe that the anchor investor will be the European Investment Bank, which is currently finalizing its due diligence. So the first idea, I think that if we want to deliver the Paris Agreement and stick to SDGs, funds or any financial institution trying to deliver on this promise should align according to one of the SDGs. In this case, it's 15.3. So the LDN Fund is meant to address land degradation neutrality. Land degradation neutrality is a global issue. And today, so it's SDG 15.3, and for which the UNFCCC is the custodian. Today we have 1.3 billion hectares of arable lands. We degrade 12 million hectares a year. Obviously, if it's 10 billion of us, or 9 billion by 2050, we can't afford to lose more land, so the trend must be stopped. So land degradation neutrality is defined as a state according to which the quality and quantity of land that provide ecosystem services decreases. In this case, it's measured by 3 criteria: soil organic carbon, land productivity, and land use change. So the second idea is that the LDN fund is a mission-driven fund. We need to deliver positive impacts with high environmental and social standards. We have incorporated the IFC performance standards. I think today this is really vital for any fund or financial institution trying to do anything on agricultural land. The standards must be strong. So we're looking at promoting good agricultural practices. So what are they? Normally they, of course, would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They maintain or increase soil fertility, soil carbon at reasonable costs, and they do so with a reasonable use of inputs. They avoid the creation of ecological barriers, the loss of biodiversity, and normally good agricultural practices. You do promote benefit sharing agreements, at least at-growth schemes, something that shows that you're not working on an enclave. So the fund is dedicated to value creation. My third point is that if we want to have a demonstration effect, things should be bankable. Farmers are interested in things that work, otherwise they have little bandwidth to accept innovations that have a cost. So you need to make things work on the ground. So we have identified two strategies we're leveraging on basically scaling up. The bottom-up approach is supporting cooperatives that need reinforcement of financing, and the other one, you need to work as well in order to deliver the Paris Agreements with the large industrial groups that want to integrate the upstream of the supply chain in a more sustainable manner. You have to work with both. So that's why, in our case, in the LDN Fund case, we are really trying to go further and provide financing that is not available in the market. That's what we call the additionality of the fund. You're here to do something that commercial banks won't do. So I think it's important as well to identify the sweet spot where you're really adding value. And finally, I think for all these new structures, it's really important to have an innovative financial structure. We call it a layered structured fund. It's blending finance. It's having public and private money blended in the same source. So if you want to go take risks that commercial banks won't take, like financing farmers for long-term capex financing in remote areas of the Andes for agroforestry purposes, you will not get financing at the bank if you have got no collateral and if you want 7-year finance. So here is what we're trying to do. And in order to attract pension funds or financiers who will only lend to the rich, or at least to people who have got collateral, something they can seize in case of default, you need public money. At least to start the pump, you need maybe 20-30% of first loss money. And once you start developing a track record, we believe you'll be able to fly solo without public money. So this is the point of being catalytic. Thank you.
Thank you, Boris. Moving on to Noel Oettle. This is actually traditionally one of my favorite pieces, you know, when we have actual farmers on panels here at the COP. Noel manages a suite of rural projects from the Environmental Monitoring Group, EMG's rural field office in the Northern Cape, South Africa, where he also lives and tends to his patch of organic fruit and vegetables. Noel strives to link local and global realities in ways that enable small-scale rooibos farmers. Rooibos, you might know from the tea, the red bush tea, to respond more effectively to the challenges of trade, climate change, and biodiversity loss, while also enabling decision makers to understand and respond to the realities of rural people. Noel is also managing director of Avontur, which is a 1,300 hectare property on the North Bokkeveld Plateau that was purchased by the World Wildlife Fund in 2008 to conserve its unique biodiversity. And Avontur is a member of the National Farmers Union of South Africa. So, Noel, I ask you for your remarks. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. I want to start off by just sharing a few perspectives on climate finance. And I've prepared a few slides to reflect the perspective of the World Farmers Organization. And see if I can operate this animal. There we go. So my perspective is a global one, but also an African one. And as we all know, in Africa in particular, agriculture will be further severely affected by climate change, and farmers are typically the most vulnerable to climate change. And being the most vulnerable are also the most likely to pack up and migrate to other places if they're not able to sustain their livelihoods. Their work relies completely on the weather or climate conditions, and in any one year, climatic variability can impact totally on production. And the farmers I work with are looking at 100% loss this year with the failure of the winter rains in the Cape region in South Africa. On the other hand, we all depend. The farmer feeds them all, as the song goes. And in this context, I think it's a no-brainer to say that farmers must be supported in their role. And that would include via facilitating access to climate funds. Now, as we know, the Paris Agreement responded to the scale of the challenge. And by the way, I heard a whisper just now that agriculture has been agreed to in the text, and it'll be announced tomorrow. I haven't seen anything, but look forward to seeing what's coming out of the negotiation. But the agreement broadly recognized the fundamental priority of safeguarding food security and ending hunger, and the particular vulnerabilities of food production systems and to the adverse impacts of climate change. And it also mandated an increase in the ability to adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change and foster climate resilience and low greenhouse gas emissions development in a manner that does not threaten food production. So, in response, the World Farmers Organization has a number of key recommendations to transform agricultural productivity and resilience for food security, and I want to briefly run through these. And firstly, we need to understand that agriculture is unique. It's not just another industry. It's not like any other similar enterprise on the planet. Farmers, by the way, only have one kind of silo, and that's the kind of silo you put grain in. And as for the silos that proliferate in governments, in intergovernmental organizations, in places like COPs, farmers don't operate in that space because they don't have the luxury of separating out, as academics can, different elements, and they don't have the luxury of being able to wait for a few years to see the outcomes of research. They're always under pressure to use their best judgment to implement and to make a whole system function as best they can. So without a doubt, we need a vast increase in financing and investment. We need to develop strategies for resilience and risk management and recognize and reward multiple benefits, because that's where agriculture really can make a huge difference. Not just sequestering carbon, for example, but promoting adaptation, enabling different mixes of solutions to be taken forward. We want to see promotion of productivity and emissions intensity for mitigation, and that a farmer-centric, gender-sensitive approach be taken. And lastly, we believe it's vital to pursue integrated, harmonized processes at scale, at all scales. We're not just talking about, for example, small-scale farmers who are such a huge priority in terms of addressing issues of poverty, and who also make a hugely significant contribution to feeding the world's population, but also large-scale agriculture, which manages vast hectareages on the planet and therefore has a really huge footprint in terms of the climate debate. I've been asked to answer a question to do with adaptation, to reflect a little bit on the role that providers of climate finance can play in facilitating research, knowledge, and technology transfer to support farmers to adapt to climate change. And I think adaptation is half of the picture. It's a very important half of the picture. And I want to just share a few thoughts on that. Firstly, as regards research, in my experience, I spent 9 years of my life working at a university, at the interface between a science-based agricultural faculty and a small farmer community. And I've seen more than ample evidence that the most useful research in this field is research that is farmer-driven, informed by farmer needs, and in which farmers actually actively participate, not just in defining the research hypothesis, but actually implementation, data gathering, and participating in the analysis and the conclusions emerging from that. And there can be no doubt that we're not doing enough. We're not doing enough on research. We're not doing enough on extension either. And extension, recent research in South Africa in the large-scale commercial agricultural sector has shown that the biggest single influencing factor on enhancing conservation of natural resources is extension, which goes in the face of a lot of popular belief that extension is something old-fashioned and no longer relevant. In terms of knowledge development, farmers are eternally curious. We're engaged in complex systems, and we're always wondering, what are the causes, what are the effects, how do they interact with one another? So support that, feed that, and whether you want to call it indigenous knowledge, local knowledge, traditional knowledge, I think from a farmer point of view, it's not relevant what label you give it. It's our knowledge. So if you want to talk to a farmer, talk to us about what we know, talk to us about what we're curious about, and build upon that. And yes, science is of enormous value, but it need not be divorced, separate from farmer knowledge. It can simply be integrated and contribute to building wider, deeper knowledge, especially when we're dealing with the complexities of a changing climate and the very unique role that agriculture can play in terms of addressing that. Knowledge exchange, for example, IFAD, I think, knows this well. Knowledge exchange amongst farmer communities is an enormously powerful tool for broadening the knowledge base. When it comes to, so I don't really talk about knowledge transfer because no one's ever managed to plug anything into my brain to transfer knowledge into here. But I think that knowledge development and knowledge sharing is a more appropriate way to think about it. However, technology transfer, yes, indeed, finance, the right kinds of finance can make a huge difference. I also operate a small farm, which is off-grid, solar-powered. Currently, we don't have access to small and medium-scale solar-driven agricultural equipment. But it could make a huge difference if those kind of technologies were rolled out a lot faster. And we could imagine a future for agriculture in Africa where mechanized agriculture is being driven by the sun and not by fossil fuels. And of course, minimum till or no-till technologies hold huge promise and have demonstrated their value. In the current drought in my part of the world, we can see day and night the difference between the minimum till fields and the conventional tilled fields. And farms, agriculture has huge potential for generating power, generating energy, biogas, solar power, etc. And I believe their governments can play a massive role, and financing agents can play a massive role in enabling energy produced on farms to enter the broader market and not simply be used on farm. And with those thoughts, thank you very much.
Thank you, Noel, for this very enlightening, interesting, and relevant perspective. And we're moving on, last but not least, to Ms. Ekhosuehi Iyahen, Director of Policy and Technical Advisory Services at the Africa Risk Capacity, which is a slightly different perspective on climate finance. Ekhosuehi has more than 11 years of experience in a range of finance and private and public sector areas, having focused on developing sovereign risk insurance pools and funds for developing countries. Prior to joining the Africa Risk Capacity, she was involved in managing and supervising the technical and operational aspects of the World Bank sponsors Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, CRIF, which some of you might have come across in the context of the recent catastrophic storms that hit the Caribbean. So, Ekhosuehi, I invite you to deliver your remarks. We gave you the question, can you share insights into how African governments have sought to access financing in innovative ways to address climate risks faced by small farmers?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, first and foremost, I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to actually share the experiences that we've had on the continent in terms of implementing the African risk capacity, which is, I think, emerging as really an innovative development globally, actually, in terms of how governments have sought to address the issue of risks within the agricultural sector and as it relates to food security. So ARC was established by the African Union in 2012, and it came out of discussions that were being held with the World Food Programme and the African Union about the fact that you have an African continent where the majority of people are employed within the agricultural sector, which is extremely vulnerable to the vagaries of climate change. But we also have a situation where you have a drought occurring, and usually what happens is that governments are quite overwhelmed in terms of responding to these disasters, and there's a heavy dependence on the international community to finance response. What this means is that there's a delay in financing between when the season ends, the rains have failed, and when financing gets to farmers to help them respond to these events. This has an impact on the people, the farmers, the individuals who are affected, but it also has a significant impact in terms of development on countries, as countries usually then have to divert resources from education, health, even investment in agriculture to support response to individuals. And so the idea from the African Union in collaboration with WFP was, we've invested quite a bit already in the development of early warning systems on the continent. We've also done a lot of work in terms of developing contingency plans, developing social safety net systems. But what was really lacking was how you link the existence of early warning systems with these contingency plans to ensure that there is timely and efficient response to disasters when they do occur. So what ARC does as a specialized agency of the African Union is to work with our member states to say, how can we help them better prepare, plan, and respond to these disasters when they occur? We have 33 countries that are signatory to the treaty at the AU level. And of these 33 countries, we have active MOUs with 16 of them. What we do is we engage our governments on 3 work streams. The first being trying to build an understanding when we look at drought, for example. What does that mean in terms of impact on a country? We say if there is a deficiency in water, what does that mean to a crop that the majority of low-income households are dependent upon? And then we try to say, if a government were to respond to these people, what would be the cost of response to that government? And so at the end of that, we come up with a very clear picture that speaks and resonates not only to people who sit in ministries of environment or Ministry of Agriculture, but also ministries of finance, of what that liability looks like in terms of when a drought or disaster occurs in your particular government. The second work stream that we focus on is really to say, okay, if a disaster or drought were to occur, what kind of activities would you implement to respond to these events? How would you target the people who are most vulnerable? And then our governments prepare what we call operation plans, which are submitted for review. And if we feel, or a technical review committee for review of these plans, and this committee is basically responsible for saying if a government or how reliable are these systems in terms of targeting those people who have been most affected by a drought when it occurs. And then our final work stream is actually the offering of an insurance mechanism to our governments. So ARC offers an insurance fund where countries can pay a premium to access insurance coverage, with those resources being used to trigger response to events once they occur on the ground. And so we link all of these three components of our work to say, okay, if a government places a contract, you have an event occurs, it affects a certain amount of people and it's triggered, we quickly can release those resources to effect response very immediately after the event has occurred. And so for us, that's really critical if we look at the theme of the discussion here, because it's about leveraging domestic resources. You get governments to pay a premium to recognize on the books what that liability is. But it's also about how do we make sure that there is accountability at the end of the day in terms of ensuring that those resources get to the people who are most affected. But we also leverage donor resources and private capital in the sense that the insurance company is capitalized through resources from KfW and DFID of US $200 million, but we access the reinsurance markets, which covers that portfolio of risks that's taken on through the African governments. So our experience today has been, I think, quite an interesting one in the sense that we have launched 4 drought insurance pools over the years. And with these pools, countries have actually mobilized $55 million in premium from domestic budgets. And I think this is quite significant when we talk about risks and government understanding of risk and how much they're willing to commit. I think it's about information, communication, articulating what the liability is and helping them to find the resources to deal with that. And in those 4 years, or the 4 years that we've been operational, we've paid out $34 million to 4 countries that have been affected by drought. And those resources have gone to assisting 2 million people and 1 million cattle with very timely resources after droughts have occurred. And so these are the kinds of innovations that we really want to see on our continent, because it's about if you can help our farmers and our vulnerable people with assistance early enough, then they are not forced to undertake negative coping strategies that undermine not only their ability to support their livelihoods, but also the development gains that we want to see on our continent. So I'll leave it there for now, but that is essentially what the African Risk Capacity is and what we do.
Thank you very much. I mean, you have heard, I think, a very wide-ranging set of views from different perspectives. A government, the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund, a National Farmers Union, and the Africa Risk Capacity are really drawing the arc also into the field of risk transfer for catastrophic losses. So I would like to ask whether there are still any questions in the audience. I know it's late. I know we're all kind of workshopped out and tired, but use the opportunity that you have with the people here on the panel to ask what you always wanted to ask. Please, yeah. Can I again ask you to maybe make a, yeah, thank you.
Thank you to the panel. Gabriela Merla. This question is for Mr. Boris. You spoke about different funds that are allocating the resources in those small producers, right? Small producers are not able to produce business plans, and funds usually require to have a business plan to invest. Who is paying the business plans, or how is your approach with these small producers that do not have the skills nor the negotiations for being able to have a good deal when they're receiving finance? Thank you.
Good question, thank you. Today, we're not able to work with smallholders individually. We can work with smallholders when they're already aggregated in the form of cooperatives. Obviously, if you want to reach scale, which is what the LDN Fund intends to do, you need to have an intermediary that will aggregate the farmers. So it's true that we can't serve everyone. You can't be everything to everyone. It's a basic marketing principle that actually can apply to various activities, that some funds or some grant money should be maybe allocated to capacity building when you really have very high levels of illiteracy, for example. Then when it comes to farmers who actually have some knowledge, have some practice, have access to inputs, then they need funds to access better vegetal material or nurseries or things like that. So yeah, it's true, we can't do everything.
Any other? Yeah, please.
Merci. Ludwig Liagre de l'UNCCD. J'ai une question pour Madame la ministre du Mali. J'étais très heureux de voir sur le stand, sur le pavillon du Mali, que vous travaillez actuellement sur un fonds national climat. Et donc on est très heureux de voir ça parce que nous, à l'UNCCD, on appuie ensemble d'ailleurs avec d'autres organisations comme la FAO, des initiatives de fonds nationaux pour l'environnement. C'est très innovant, c'est approprié par les pays et donc il y a de la durabilité. Et donc nous, on est très heureux de voir ça. Et donc ma question, ce serait comment est-ce que vous pensez que ce fonds national climat qui est utilisé pour la NDC peut être utilisé pour l'usage des terres, pour l'agriculture, pour les forêts, et comment mobiliser le secteur privé avec ce genre d'outils? Maybe in English quickly, for the colleagues who may not speak French, you may know that in Mali there is a national climate fund, very innovative mechanism that enables the country to have autonomy over resource mobilization and spending for the implementation of the NDC. So my question is how this national climate fund could be used for the land use sector, agriculture, forestry, and how could it help to mobilize the private sector?
Merci beaucoup pour la question. Justement, je disais à mon voisin de gauche que j'avais omis de parler du Fonds Climat Mali, qui est quand même une initiative très importante. Et donc, vous me donnez l'opportunité d'en parler. C'est avec grand plaisir que je confirme que nous avons bien un Fonds Climat Mali. Mais à la phase actuelle, nous sommes en partenariat avec le MPTF du PNUD. Donc, il est important de souligner aussi que la gestion, elle est typiquement nationale. C'est-à-dire les instances de gouvernance de ce fonds sont nationales. Nous avons un comité de pilotage qui sélectionne les projets. Et donc, dans ce comité de pilotage, il y a les représentants des services techniques, des partenaires, de la société civile et du secteur privé. Donc, c'est pour nous une opportunité de pouvoir mettre ensemble toutes les parties prenantes autour du financement de projets, comme on dit, innovants et qui touchent les différents secteurs dont vous venez de parler, justement, l'agriculture, l'élevage, les forêts. Et donc, ce programme existe déjà depuis 5 ans. Nous sommes en train de, malheureusement, tenant compte de la situation que le Mali a connue en 2012, nous l'avons lancé officiellement en décembre 2011 en Afrique du Sud. Et il a démarré en 2012, mais avec les événements que le Mali a connus, ce n'est qu'en 2014 que les premiers projets ont été réellement financés. Et donc, à date, nous avons des projets, comme je l'ai dit, dans les différentes thématiques. Mais ce qui est important, c'est que c'est vraiment un partenariat aussi pour la mise en œuvre de ces projets avec les institutions du système des Nations Unies, les ONG et les populations à la base. Donc, ce sont des projets qui sont préparés avec les communautés sur la base des différentes conventions, mais également qui répondent aussi aux plans de développement économique et sociaux qui sont élaborés par les collectivités. Donc, ça, c'est un aspect important qu'il faut souligner. Voilà. Donc, le fonds a pour objectif donc, de financer, mais aussi de renforcer les capacités au niveau national pour que d'ici 3 ans et demi, 4 ans maximum, avant qu'on passe à la nationalisation entière de ce fonds, qui, comme je l'ai dit tantôt, pour l'instant, la gestion fiduciaire uniquement est faite par le PNUD. Merci.
Maybe just to translate quickly, Mali has a climate fund since 2011, and it was operationalized only 2014 because there was a crisis, a political crisis between 2012 and 2014. So, and they are very happy right now to start implementing few projects coming from the ground, designed by local communities, and there is also a kind of a partnership with UNDP, who is managing the fiduciary side of that fund. So they would like for the next coming years also to have it 100% Malian climate fund with the support of all stakeholders and all partners. So you all are welcome to support that fund. And it's a mechanism to implement all these international conventions, including the UNFCCC, the climate, and they are looking also at other partners to implement more projects in Mali. So it's an innovative financial instrument under the leadership, and they are looking at working with all sectors, and they have already projects on the ground being funded by that climate fund.
Thank you very much. Looking around the room, if there are no more questions, then I would like to thank the panelists for their very interesting contributions, also for pushing their own pieces in this very complex puzzle. I know that we all come from different organizational backgrounds, different disciplines, and we all need to be working together in order to address this difficult challenge of managing our land differently. I really thank you for your endurance, for sticking it out very late in the day. I wish you a good remaining conference and hope to see you at other side events. And please join me at giving the panel a hand.